I guess it's not a surprise that a lot of people have been asking me what I think of Chris Stuckmann's directorial debut, Shelby Oaks, since I spend a fair amount of my first Star Wars video talking about his Star Wars videos. But before I start talking about Shelby Oaks, I would just like to make it clear that I never had some kind of personal problem with Chris Stuckmann. As I say in the Star Wars video, I'm only trying to go after his reviews, not go after him personally. I don't know the guy, I never met the guy. As far as I know, he seems like a perfectly nice person. Honestly, I kind of hope he never watches this video because I know it wouldn't be fun to put in the work of making a movie and then listen to somebody tearing it apart. Maybe it even seems unfair to post a negative review of his movie since I've heard that I guess now Stuckmann has said that he doesn't post negative reviews anymore. But actually, I don't think that not posting negative reviews is something admirable, however nice his intentions might be. If you'll never say anything bad about a movie, then it doesn't mean anything when you say something good about a movie. The role of critics isn't just to be mindless cheerleaders for movies. It's supposed to be to post insights and meaningful analysis, which you can't do if you can't talk about it when there's a problem. But that brings me to the whole issue of what critics are supposed to do and what the role of a critic is, which is the whole reason that I went after Stuckmann's videos in my earlier videos to begin with. Like I said, I wasn't trying to go after him personally, but his reviews were actually perfect examples of points I was trying to make about larger problems with the way that critics these days talk about things.
I've discovered that most critics themselves are cinematically illiterate. They don't really know much about movies. They don't know the history, they don't know the technology, they don't know anything. So for them to try to analyze it, they're lost.
For those younger viewers of my channel, you might not be old enough to remember this, but there used to be this idea that critics were actually supposed to be educated about the subjects they were talking about. You would read criticism to learn things. Critics were also expected to be good writers. They had to have informed ideas, and they also had to be good at articulating those ideas. With a critic like Pauline Kael, I disagreed with about 80% of her opinions. She got it wrong on a lot of movies that are now considered to be masterpieces. But she knew her stuff, and she was an interesting writer. So what she says is always worth reading, even if you disagree with it. Between Siskel and Ebert, on average, I think I probably agree with Siskel's take on movies more often, but Ebert was the better writer, and so I enjoyed reading Ebert more. When you read a review you disagree with, if it's well written and smart, it'll make you understand how they came to a different conclusion than you, and that could either change your mind or it could help you to articulate why it is that you disagree with them. As a teen, I even wrote letters to Ebert a few times when I disagreed with something that he said about a movie, because reading his review made me think about my own opinions and it made me analyze why I disagreed with him. When you read the review, you were having a good-natured debate with him in your head. While you might disagree with what he said, he was worth debating with because he knew what he was talking about and had good reasons for his opinions. Reading good film criticism, even when you disagree with it, is so valuable because it gives you the tools to analyze things and to express your own views in a meaningful way. It makes your own opinions smarter, and ultimately it helps you to understand yourself. With the death of good film criticism, these are tools that a lot of people just don't even have anymore these days.
Now these are eyes that analyze movies.
Siskel and Ebert were far from snobs or elitists. They were the most popular film critics in the country for decades, but they did know their movie history, and most importantly, they cared about movies and wanted to treat them as an art form that were worthy of serious discussion. They weren't casual about what they did. That's why they'd get so heated up about things and have fights with each other that are still fun to watch to this day, even if in some cases the movie that they're fighting about has been forgotten. They didn't take themselves too seriously, but they took movies very seriously. And that's the reason that if they thought that a movie failed, they could be merciless to the movie. They would have thought the idea of not writing any negative reviews was completely insulting to movies and to their own profession, which it is. So believe it or not, it actually used to be a requirement of being a film critic that you would know a lot about movies and also that you would be a good writer who could express your views very eloquently. It's only in the last 25 years or so and on the internet that that idea has started to completely fall apart. I would say that the destruction of meaningful film criticism started well before red letter media, actually, although they did play an important part. Earlier than that, though, there were people like Harry Knowles. Harry Knowles has mostly disappeared now after accusations accusing him of being a sex pest, among other things, so if you're one of those young viewers I mentioned earlier, you might not know who he is either, but for a minute there in the early 2000s, he was very well known. The thing about Harry Knowles is that he is an absolute idiot. He's essentially illiterate. Basic spelling and punctuation is completely beyond him, and his reviews are incoherent walls of rambling that sometimes you can barely even decipher. If you were trying to write like he does for some kind of, avant-garde poetry or something, you would need a lot of drugs, but I think Harry wrote this way just purely by nature of being a moron. So if up until that point, being a good writer was a requirement for being a film critic, then how did Harry Knowles get famous at doing that job? Well, how it happened is that the internet happened, meaning he didn't need to get published by anybody in order to post his reviews and have people see him. And the way he started getting treated like a real critic is that studios and people in positions of power noticed that people out there were listening to him and reading his reviews. The thing is that when I say that you're supposed to read film criticism to be educated and to learn something, the problem is that a lot of people don't like learning things. I think it's pointless to read reviews by somebody who doesn't know as much as you or more than you because they won't have anything to teach you. But for a lot of people, when they encounter somebody who knows more than they do, rather than wanting to learn, they get defensive and they feel threatened. They don't want a film critic to teach them things. They want a film critic that will reassure them by repeating back to them what they already know. They think that a good review is one that they immediately agree with, not one that makes them think. If a critic knows more about movies than they do, they'll use a pejorative like snob or pretentious to try to paint knowing things as a negative. So since there are a lot of people out there who don't know anything about movies and who want to hear from a critic who has the same level of knowledge that they do, not more, Harry Knowles was the perfect critic for those people. Film studios only care about making money, so once they saw that people were reading Harry's reviews, they didn't care how stupid the reviews were, they just wanted him to like their movies. And since Harry wasn't a real film critic or a real journalist and he had no standards, studios found that he was a very cheap whore to buy. He started getting invited to do set visits and things like that, and so he had more exclusive news about movies, which meant that he would get more readers, which meant that studios then gave him even more attention, and it was a vicious cycle. The idea that to be a film critic meant you had to be educated and be a good writer, that was basically over at that point. What Red Letter Media then did was to take this innovation of the film critic who had no idea what he was doing and no idea what he was talking about, and they brought that over to the nascent platform of YouTube. There, they could add sound effects and wacky music and footage of pizza rolls and tied up hookers in order to entertain the people out there who were so thick that they thought even reading Harry Knowles reviews was too intellectual for them and who wanted something for an even lower attention span. And then after Red Letter Media, you had a whole generation of people who grew up thinking that this kind of video was film criticism. And since film criticism was now a job with no qualifications, many of those people realized that they could do what Red Letter Media did themselves, and they rushed to copy it. So that brings us to Chris Stuckmann. One of the reasons why I singled Chris out in my Star Wars videos because he's so open about copying Red Letter Media. He cites them specifically as being an example of what he thinks great film criticism is. It was especially good for my video because I was trying to show how many Star Wars reviews just mindlessly copy other Star Wars reviews without trying to understand the movies for themselves, and most of what Stuckmann has to say about the Star Wars prequels he's just copying verbatim from Red Letter Media. The problem with this being that Red Letter Media videos are pizza roll jokes, not film criticism. Whenever I talk about Red Letter Media, if I make a point about the obvious factual inaccuracies in their videos, I'll always get people like, "It's a comedy video, you idiot, you're not supposed to take it seriously." And yet, at the exact same time, the exact same people take everything that Red Letter Media says as gospel, and the opinions of Red Letter Media, not just their Star Wars takes, but the entire way that they talk about movies, have been the template slavishly followed by hundreds of amateurs just like Stuckmann. On the one hand, we're supposed to take Red Letter Media videos as big jokes, which is how they evade any serious analysis of what they say, but on the other hand, when all the hundreds of Stuckmanns out there make their completely straight-faced reviews, they copy Red Letter Media, sometimes word for word, even the obvious factual inaccuracies in the Red Letter Media reviews.
You know, it really adds a lot of tension in the movie when the main enemy forces are totally ineffective.
Lifeless, dull battle droids that can be cut in half in an instant provided absolutely no tension.
If you ask me, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi should have been combined to form a new character called Obi-Wan Kenobi.
And in all honesty, Qui-Gon Jinn shouldn't have even been in this movie. It should have just been Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Wait, why is there a child-sized helmet and goggles in the cockpit?
But something about that scene always bothered me. He's got a child-sized helmet in the cockpit.
So all of that is why I seized on Stuckmann as the perfect example for me to use when I was talking about what film criticism has deteriorated into these days. I wanted to make the point that a lot of the criticism of the Star Wars prequels didn't come from a place of reasoned analysis, but rather from a place of people not understanding what they were watching, not even having the tools or context to understand what they were watching.
You're constantly seeing the same movement happen, left to right, left to right, over and over again.
But the video I made was 6 years ago, and now we've moved a step beyond that. The people who don't know anything about movies have moved beyond wanting to be film critics, and now they're actually making films. And so that's how we have Shelby Oaks. Shelby Oaks isn't the worst movie in the world. If you like horror movies, which I do, and if you watch a lot of them, then you know that a lot of horror movies are pretty bad, and it takes some work to find the decent ones. With any type of art, you know that probably about 90% of it is bad, and you have to do some sifting to find the good 10%. With horror movies, I'd say it's more like 98% are bad, but when you find the good ones, the best horror movies, I think, can be great art. They can be up there with the greatest movies ever made. And then beyond that, there's also that middle ground of very good and entertaining ones. Shelby Oaks, unfortunately, doesn't really manage to get into either of those levels, though. I wasn't set on hating Shelby Oaks just because of who made it. Actually, if anything, knowing the story behind it helps the movie quite a bit. It sits at a very low average score on Rotten Tomatoes and Internet Movie Database and places like that, but you can tell that a lot of the early reviews just wanted to be kind to it just because of who made it. If you read the early reviews and comments, there's a lot of like, hey, Stuckmann managed to make his movie, good for him. If I didn't know who made it, I probably would have just put it into the trash heap of the 100 other bad horror movies that I watch in a year, and I wouldn't have even thought about it again. I might not have even finished watching it because the first half is pretty boring, and if I hadn't finished it, that probably would have helped it even more because it's in the last third where it really gets especially bad. But because of the fact that you know Stuckmann made it, and you know how badly he wanted to make it, you kind of want to root for it in this underdog way. In the bad scenes, you can still picture how excited he must have been to really be there, really making a movie, and how much he wanted to make something cool. If I thought the movie was good, I'd be happy to say so. I have no problem giving credit where it's due. There's even a part of the movie around 2/3 through where I thought it came to life for a few minutes, and I was wondering if it might pay off in the home stretch. I guess I should probably give a spoiler warning now before I go into details about that part and the rest of the movie, although I don't think you really need much of a spoiler warning because if you know your horror movie tropes, you'll probably see everything in this movie coming about half an hour away before it happens. But the part I'm talking about where the movie seems to perk up for a minute is when the character Mia, who's searching for her sister Riley, she finds a house in the woods with an old woman living in it and follows the old woman into the house. You'll probably notice that everything about the scene is a cliche already. The creepy cabin out in the woods, the creepy old woman who's obviously some kind of witch living in the creepy cabin. But the old woman is played by Robin Bartlett, who's a character actor that has a very long filmography. She's appeared in a Spielberg movie, in a Coen Brothers movie, in a Scorsese movie, even in a Woody Allen movie. Usually in these movies she's played small roles, but still, you know, she's a legit actor, which makes her stand out from certain other cast members in Shelby Oaks. And Stuckmann was lucky to get her. He doesn't really write much for her to play other than standing around and glowering at Mia in a creepy way, but Bartlett still manages to find more entertaining moments in the role than what was actually written for her. As for the rest of the cast, for the most part it's okay that most of them aren't exactly big name actors because in most cases Stuckmann hasn't written anything for them to do. Mia, the character that's searching for her sister, she's really the only one that has much to do in the movie. The sister that Mia is searching for, Riley, after they find her, she doesn't really have much to do other than stand around in a really funny looking wig and try to look scared for a little while. Or at least I'm assuming that that's a wig because I don't know why on earth somebody working on the movie would have done that to her hair intentionally.
Hey, it's not that bad. You can't concentrate on the negative. Look, he's got some nice things to say here. The soldiers' costumes are very realistic. That's positive.
In a few cases, Stuckmann tries to give little moments to the other characters, but he doesn't know how to develop them. There's this weird moment where Mia is telling her husband her theories that she's been developing about the demon that took her sister, or, you know, whatever it is. And even if you don't buy the demon part, she's at least outlining some pretty concrete evidence that there's something pretty fucked up about what happened that should be investigated. But rather than being interested or understanding, her husband just suddenly tells her, "You need help," and then he storms out of the room without actually trying to get her any of the help that he just said that she needed. Now, I'm assuming that the idea here is that Mia was supposed to appear to be becoming increasingly unhinged and that the scene was supposed to show how the people in her life were getting frustrated with her and she was becoming isolated, right? But the thing is that before that scene, we never really get an inkling about her husband's increasing frustration toward her. Before that, when she talks to him about what's happening, he mostly just kind of stares at her blankly and he doesn't seem to have much of an opinion, or he just seems to generally sympathetic. So when he suddenly seems seems angry with her and storms off. It just kind of comes out of nowhere and it's unintentionally comedic. This is how most of the characters are, though, and just kind of generic blank slates that do things because the script says that they should do these things, not because there's any kind of character development behind it.
I think that's what he struggles the most with in his writing.
Which, again, if we're talking about just kind of your average generic horror movie, a lot of them don't really have any very interesting characters. So you could let that slide if the movie was still scary or if the plot was intriguing. But it isn't. The most intriguing thing about the movie is that it's almost entirely made up of cliches to the extent that it almost seems like some kind of satire or parody. If you watch horror movies at all, of course, you'll immediately notice in this movie that there's a lot of Blair Witch and also a lot of Rosemary's Baby. Since Stuckmann is doing the found footage thing, people, of course, they seize on Blair Witch first because that's the most famous one. But there's also a lot of stuff from other found footage movies like Wreck, and most especially, there's a lot of Lake Mungo. And I mean, there's a lot of Lake Mungo. It makes sense that Stuckmann would go all in on ripping off Lake Mungo since he has such a little boner for Red Letter Media, and Jay can never shut up about how much he loves Lake Mungo. So in Stuckmann's little world where he thinks that Red Letter Media are great film critics, that makes Lake Mungo something like, the Citizen Kane of found footage. But only part of Shelby Oaks is doing the found footage thing, and then it goes off to rip off a lot of other stuff as well, Rosemary's Baby being another obvious one, but also then The Omen and other things along that line. In the movie, when they find Riley locked up in tunnels under the house, Stuckmann, he's also doing a bit of Krieger's much better movie Barbarian. What he's doing here, though, is something entirely different than what I talk about in my Star Wars videos when I talk about George Lucas quoting other movies. There's a difference between quotes and homages and just plain lazy copying. Without getting into the whole issue of appropriation versus meaningful intertextual dialogue, to put it simply, the point is that if Lucas does something like, to use the example that I discuss in a lot more detail in my Star Wars video, when Lucas is using imagery from Frankenstein during the scenes where Anakin gets put into his Vader suit, Lucas is doing that to say something meaningful. He's comparing what happened to Anakin to what happened in the story of Frankenstein, so he's using the themes of one story to show what he's getting at in his story. A lot of people who don't understand this kind of subtext think that Lucas is just copying something, which is never the point. Lucas is never just copying something because he doesn't have ideas of his own, but that is exactly what Stuckmann is doing when Stuckmann is copying something. There's no point when he's using a shot from Lake Mungo that he's trying to make a meaningful parallel between some kind of thematic resonance in Lake Mungo and a symbolic meaning that he's trying to convey in the story he's telling. He just liked a creepy moment in Lake Mungo, and so he decided to try to do that Lake Mungo moment in his movie. The problem is that because it doesn't mean anything in his movie, it suddenly becomes not creepy and not interesting. The cliches in Shelby Oaks go well beyond just copying particular movies, though. It's not just particular moments or scenes, it's everything about Shelby Oaks is copied from somewhere. Stuckmann is copying things that have been done so many times that you couldn't even point to exactly which movie he's copying, because there are 100 of them. It's just a total cliche. The movie does the creepy cabin in the woods, but then it also does the creepy abandoned theme park, and then it even also does the creepy abandoned mental asylum as well. He really likes doing the thing where the bad guy's eyes catch the light in the dark like wolf eyes, which has been done, countless times before. If he did it once or twice to show that somebody was possessed or whatever it is that he wants to show, that's fair game, it's a common trope, but he does it about 100 times, and he never puts any kind of new spin on it. It's also that it's more than just the stories and the characters that Stuckmann are doing that are cliches. It's everything. It's the way the movie's shot, the way the movie's edited, the way the movie's lit, the way the camera moves, everything about the movie. The sheer amount of cliches could maybe even have been some kind of meta commentary on horror movie tropes if this movie was smarter than it is. But as it is, it's just kind of some kind of singularity of every trope that you're tired of seeing in direct-to-video horror movies all stacked up together. The phrase that kept occurring to me was, oops, all cliches. Like somebody said, what if every single shot was something that's already been overdone to the point of being annoying? Would it then come all the way back around and become new again? Well, no, it turns out that it doesn't. I mean, every movie is going to have things that are similar to things that have been done in other movies. That's not a problem. It's just the reality of not being the first movie that was ever made. It's been observed many times that there are only so many basic story structures, and then almost all stories are variations on those basic structures. Kubrick used to say something like, there are only about 5 stories, but the job of the artist is to tell the story better than anybody else has told it before. You can try to tell it better, or you can at least try to tell it differently if you can't tell it better. Put a new spin on it. To paraphrase another popular sentiment that's been attributed variously over the years, bad artists copy, but great artists steal. Meaning that every artist is influenced by other artists that have come before them, but when you're reusing something, something, you can't just copy how it already was. You have to do something to it, which makes it your own. Otherwise, there's no point. Stuckmann, though, only ever copies. And the thing is that while he's copying all this stuff, he never copies any of it all that well. Blair Witch isn't the first found footage movie, but it was one of the first to become such a massive success. And part of the reason for that was because it was filmed in such a way that it seemed like if something like that really did happen, this is what the footage of it really would look like. A lot of people at the time really thought that Blair Witch Project was real, and even if you knew the truth, when you saw it, it was convincing enough that it felt real, which is what made it effective. That's the whole purpose of doing found footage if you're doing it well. When Cannibal Holocaust came out, it was so convincing to people that the film's director for a time was in danger of facing real murder charges until he could prove that the deaths in the film weren't real deaths. Shelby Oaks copies the found footage trope, but without understanding the reason that it works or that it's exciting. None of the found footage in Shelby Oaks looks like it remotely could be believable. It's all very obviously staged for a camera.
And Revenge of the Sith does feel largely resided over.
Lake Mungo is fond of doing this thing where they show a clip that looks like real home video footage, and then they very gradually zoom in on the background or linger on a part of it until you start to notice something about the shot that seems disturbing or unnatural. In Lake Mungo, there's a whole mystery behind what you're seeing in these shots, and there's a story that's uncovered throughout the movie about the footage explaining why it is the way it is, or giving you a possible explanation of why it is the way it is. In Shelby Oaks, though, Stuckmann copies this Lake Mungo thing, and then he just keeps copying it about 50 more times, but it never looks like real footage, and it never takes you a long time to puzzle over what you're seeing and to figure it out. It's just somebody in a low-budget horror movie, and then there's some guy in a demon costume standing behind them. It's Lake Mungo without anything that made Lake Mungo interesting. Part of the problem with Shelby Oaks is that it's very confused about its intentions. A lot of the times the purpose of doing found footage in movies when people aren't doing it well is because it's just a way that they can film a horror movie without paying for decent cinematography. But in Shelby Oaks, Stuckmann obviously wants his movie to look like a real movie, not a cheapy kind of thing. So the found footage stuff is part of the movie, but most of the movie is trying to be shot like a regular movie. This also has precedence, of course, in movies like The Ring, where people are in a normal movie, but they're watching a creepy found footage type VHS tape within the movie. It removes the effect of the Lake Mungo type of subtle creepiness, though, when there's the artifice of a more typical type of movie, and none of the illusion that makes what you're seeing seem like it could be real. It just makes part of the movie being on grainy tape seem kind of pointless. But Shelby Oaks also isn't any better when it tries to look like a real movie. Stuckmann tries very hard to make the movie look nice, and he tries very hard to have the camera work look professional, but he doesn't really have any visual style of his own to speak of. The shots are colorful when it would have been better for them to have been muted, because presumably you would want those scenes to feel more grounded. There's a reason that The Exorcist happens in a house that looks completely plain, just like a normal house, almost boring to look at, because Friedkin wanted you to feel like this could be happening in your house or a house that you had been to. Whenever Shelby Oaks tries to have striking lighting or a striking camera move, it's not part of any cohesive philosophy about what effects Stuckmann wants the movie to have. It's just him trying to show that he can make a nice shot, and ultimately because of that it runs counter to what the movie should be doing. There's a good example of this in a scene when Mia is in this abandoned asylum or prison or whatever it was. Something startles her, so she falls down and drops her flashlight, and of course the flashlight chooses that moment to stop working, because that's what happens in a cliched horror movie. The flashlight goes out at the worst moment, right? Of course. But the problem is that even though in the scene the exteriors show that it's the middle of the night, because of course Mia would choose to go to the creepy abandoned asylum in the middle of the night, but when they're inside of this asylum, Stuckmann has these big shafts of light streaming in through the windows, and it looks like outside it's in the middle of the day now, or either that or like the abandoned asylum is next door to the floodlights from Wrigley Field for some reason. So Mia's flashlight goes out, but the scene is still too brightly lit. It doesn't become dark, you can still see what's happening. But of course, Stuckmann got his big shafts of light coming in through the windows, just like in a real movie with a real crew and real lighting people. I could keep going on about shots like this, but I think that you get the point, so I'll just say that I'm pointing out examples, but it's not just that these things are one or two awkward moments, it's pervasive throughout the movie. The story is also tedious because there's not a whole lot to it. Mia is supposed to be unraveling the mystery of her sister's disappearance or whatever, and she does a few cliched scenes of, she goes to libraries and she's reading about demons or whatever, but then how she finds her sister ultimately is that basically she just goes to the creepy abandoned theme park I mentioned before because she saw it in one of her sister's videos, and then basically when she gets there a dog just kind of leads her from there to the creepy cabin in the woods, and her sister just turns out to be locked in the basement of the creepy cabin. I mean, that's really it in terms of what she has to do to solve the mystery of her sister. The rest of what she does is just sort of filling in exposition to tell you about the demon and all of that stuff. Then when she gets to the cabin, there are the few minutes I mentioned mentioned earlier, which are, borderline entertaining because I liked the old lady witch. But as soon as Mia finds Riley, then the rest of the movie really just starts to fall apart. Nothing anybody does for the rest of the movie makes a whole lot of sense. It's just a string of moments that Stuckmann seemed to think would be shocking, but none of them are very surprising or earned in the context of the movie. When they try to leave the creepy cabin, Riley won't go at first and she insists on going back inside. And I think at first you're supposed to assume that that's because she wants to save her baby. And then a few minutes later, you're supposed to be shocked when it turns out that she wants to kill the baby. But it's not a shock at all because the movie is so obviously doing its whole Rosemary's Baby thing. You can see coming a mile off that the baby is going to be some kind of evil demon baby thing. Actually, if I had to point out things that I liked, there's this moment after the witch lady is doing some kind of ritual, I think, and bleeding onto the baby. There's this moment where the baby is kind of cheerfully licking the blood off of his hand, and I thought that was kind of entertaining. I thought that would be fun if they were going to go into the whole evil blood drinking demon baby thing. At the time though, Mia seems to think that the baby is just adorable in spite of it, kind of hungrily sucking blood off its hand. And then it gets confusing whether you're supposed to think that she's really too thick to notice that this baby is like some kind of evil demon vampire baby, or if you're just supposed to think that maybe there's something wrong with her too because she loves evil vampire demon babies. I think that at this point the movie was trying to play with these questions, but Stuckmann doesn't really set things up clearly, so it's all just very kind of confused. Then a few minutes later, after Riley tries to kill the baby, she gets pushed out of the window in some very awkwardly staged action, and some evil demon dogs rush in and they eat her. And at that point, there's also an insert shot of the demon baby just kind of cheerfully chilling in his crib while dogs eat his mom. And I actually kind of liked that moment too, because I thought it was sort of funny. I don't know if it was intentionally funny or not, but it was the second moment where I was like, oh, okay, we're going to do this whole evil demon baby thing. I thought this could be fun. Let's go, But then as soon as there was that little flicker of interesting stuff happening in the movie, then right after that, the movie just kind of ends. So I don't even know if the fun there with the demon baby was intentional, if it was supposed to be funny, I have no idea. Mia stops Riley from killing the baby, and she seems to think it's adorable when the baby is sucking the witch blood off of his fingers. So I thought for a minute maybe Mia was going to do the Rosemary's Baby thing, where at the end of the movie, instead of rejecting the Antichrist, she realizes what he is, and then instead of killing him, she decides to rock his cradle and protect him, right? That's what happens in Rosemary's Baby. Stuckmann was already doing Rosemary's Baby, and he even named the character of Mia, I'm assuming after Mia Farrow. So I thought that was where this was going for a minute, that Mia was going to end up being the proud mom to the evil demon baby, right? And maybe that is where Stuckmann was going, but then in the last moments of the movie, the demon who fathered the baby shows up and he puts his hand on Mia's shoulder, and the movie ends with Mia screaming about this like she's horrified. So in the end, was she deciding to embrace the demon baby, or was she horrified by it? I don't even know. Did she even understand that it was a demon baby, that the baby was evil? Really, I mean, you can't tell, because in the end of the movie, it's all just kind of such a mess. And all that sort of confused messiness of it kind of brings me back to my original point about Chris Stuckmann. Obviously, most film critics aren't filmmakers themselves, and I don't think that you have to be able to make good movies in order to be able to analyze movies. Those are two different skill sets. And I don't think that not knowing about movies or movie history makes somebody a bad person. Not everybody can be an expert on everything, and some people just don't have a big knowledge of movies. It's not a priority for them. But if you don't know basic things about film editing, like Stuckmann has displayed in some of his videos that he doesn't, then I really don't care what you have to say about George Lucas's film editing. You can say you enjoy a movie or that you don't enjoy it, that's down to your personal experience. But if you don't have technical knowledge about filmmaking, then I'm not really interested in you trying to give analytical, technical filmmaking advice. And if you don't have technical knowledge about filmmaking, then you probably don't need to be making films. I think some people like the idea of somebody like Stuckmann making a movie because they see it as a victory for somebody like them, somebody who wasn't raised in the film industry and who doesn't watch, those kinds of movies that they think are boring and pretentious. They think it's a victory for that type of person to be able to make a movie. They think, yay, somebody like me is making a movie, so he'll make a movie like what I want to see. But while they might think that's what they want to see, it isn't. Because to do any kind of art to a high level requires a high level of knowledge from the artist. And the audience doesn't have to know what the artist knows, but they'll benefit from being in the hands of an artist who knows what they're doing. It might seem like since Stuckmann is copying so many movies here, he must know a lot about movies. But if you look at the list of the movies that he's copying, it's very much like, baby's first horror movies. He's copying good movies, and in some cases even copying great movies, but they're the kind of movies that you'd put on a list if a friend told you you'd never seen much horror, and he asked you where he should start. The result is that Stuckmann is copying things that have already been copied 1,000 times. In some cases, people have been copying these things for decades, and so the end result is just tired. If he had a broader frame of reference, he could make a copy of something that was fresh enough to the viewers that it might surprise you as something that you haven't seen already done 10,000 times. He might also have the knowledge to copy it in a more technically competent way so that the results of the copy were better. In the end, though, I mean, I do feel kind of bad for making fun of Shelby Oaks because it's not as though Chris wanted to make a bad movie. Whatever his intentions, though, making a bad movie is ultimately what he did. So, what else can you say about it?
And get Stuckmanized, and get Stuckmanized, and get Stuckmanized, and get Stuckmanized, and get Stuckmanized.